Here we go then, folks. 5,352 days of Derby Day dominance on the line for Norwich City as they travel to Portman Road this weekend. High-flying Ipswich Town, hoping that this is their opportunity. Unlucky 13 is maybe the prospect for Norwich City as they travel across the border this weekend. Welcome to a very special edition of the PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast, sponsored by Coleman's Mustard as ever, looking ahead to this game. I'm joined by Mr. Sam Seaman and Paddy Sean Dyche Davitt, as he was referred to on the comments. In fact, it was, if you close your eyes, Paddy Davitt sounds like Sean Dyche, which this isn't the first time you've had that, Pad.
No, I don't get it. I mean, I've never smoked a cigarette in my life. He sounds like he smoked 40 Marlboro a day since he was like 15. But as I said to you boys, as long as nobody says I look like him, then I'll take that.
You're from similar parts of the world, though, aren't you? You're he's Kettering, is he? Is that right?
I believe so, yeah, which isn't a million miles away, yeah. But no, I just don't get it. Don't get fair play though. He's doing the business, isn't it? Everton at the minute knows his onions, as they say, as a manager. Whether you like his style or not, that's a different debate. But he's certainly an effective football manager.
Yeah, they're doing very, very well. A team in blue and white that is also doing very well, Ipswich Town, and we are looking ahead to the East Anglian Derby. And we're going to speak a little bit as well, probably touch upon it more than speak about it. The win against Sheffield Wednesday, 3-1 for Norwich City. Darren Huckabee, I felt, summed it up best when he said unconvincingly convincing, which it was in the end. Norwich could have won by more, but it maybe wasn't still a performance that would leave you full of hope and optimism, but Norwich did enough, which is good on a really good run of form. Sam, heading into the derby, before we speak about anything else, how are you feeling ahead of our trip to Suffolk and Portman Road on Saturday?
I feel kind of excited now, not really in the sense that I feel positive about Norwich's prospects, but it just feels like a bit of an occasion. I like the sort of build up and the sense around it. So in that sense, I'm sort of looking forward to it. It might get to sort of 10 or 11 o'clock, and the size of the task facing Norwich might hit me a little bit, and probably some nerves will kick in for those fans. But I think now, although there is a level of pessimism if asked about their opinions on the game and how Norwich might fare, I think fans are probably quite excited for how it'll unfold and see that. Obviously, it's been more than 4 years since that occasion has been on the line, and since Norwich fans have had that in prospect. So I think they're probably looking forward to it. Maybe not as much as Ipswich fans at the moment, but yeah, for me, I'm looking forward to covering one for the first time. Even though I sort of started watching Norwich when I was 7, so yeah, like 14, 15 years ago now, I've never actually been to one. So I'm looking forward to going to my first one. It would be quite typical if throughout pretty much my whole football supporting life, they never lost, and then the first one I went to, they go and lose that one. But yeah, I'm quite looking forward to covering one. That said, you boys have obviously been to multiple in your lives that have been full of positive memories and victories and unbeaten records. So I can't imagine you're looking forward to it in the same way.
No, but I think in fairness, I really don't like derby days as a thing, even in the times where Norwich were overwhelming favourites and there was a lot of positivity going. Some people absolutely love them, and I'm just not built for it. I don't like the added layer of pressure and intensity. Probably why I didn't make it as a footballer, along with ability and physicality and all the other stuff. I just can't deal with it. I like derby day once the full time whistle's gone. If Norwich City have got a result,
I was going to say, I'm not sure we will this weekend.
Then they're the best things in the world. But everything building up to and that 90 minutes, unless obviously you get yourself into a pretty commanding position, is torture, really. So God knows what that's like to be on the other end of. And fortunately, we've got someone coming up later in the show who knows plenty about that, because I spoke to Mark Heath from our counterparts in Suffolk, the East Anglian Daily Times, and it's fair to say they're rather chipper. So I'll bring you that chat in a little while. Paddy, same question for you, really. I mean, how are you feeling heading into this one? It's really interesting because, as I said, it's been over 5,000 days since Ipswich Town last beat Norwich City. That record is there for everybody to see. A lot of those derbies Norwich have gone into as overwhelming favourites. Not all of them. There's been a couple of scares along the way. I think we all remember that Luke Chambers, Tim Closer derby, and likewise the Daniel Farker one in that first promotion season where Ipswich probably should have beat Norwich, but a Mo Leitner goal meant that finished as a draw. Feels like the roles are reversed this time. How are you feeling as we gear up to head to Portman Road on Saturday?
Yeah, I mean, a bit longer in the tooth than you boys. So I mean, I've never seen Ipswich win this fixture as well, which underlines the longevity. Is it 13? I mean, you've broken it down into days, Connor, but I think we're talking 13 years.
14,
November 2010.
Years.
14 years, is it?
2009. Yeah.
Well, yeah, but I mean, they won in April 2009, though, didn't they?
19th of April 2009, 3-2. That's their last win over Norwich City.
Yeah. So, and then Norwich won. Yeah, I've got them in front of me. November 2010, the 4-1 game. That was that the Holt hat trick game, wasn't it?
Yeah, correct.
So, I don't come at this with quite the sort of sense of emotional tug at the heartstrings that a Norwich fan would do, or you boys for that matter, but putting your professional heads to one side. But they're great games now. I love not being involved in them in the sense that I have anything really of note to be involved with, but to be part of the occasion. I mean, the two playoff games for me were the standout ones, the 14-15 season. First leg at Portman Road was when it may be replicated this weekend, but that was intense. That was a bear pit. Norwich got out of there unscathed relatively, and then completed the job at Carpe Road. And that day as well, the Wes Houlihan penalty, and the fans on the pitch because of what it meant at the end of the game. Beating your greatest rivals to get to Wembley, and then obviously that collective went on and maybe even topped it by winning at Wembley. Those were amazing occasions. The win under the Lambert team, I think it was the second part of that season when they went to Portman Road towards the end of that championship promotion winning season and won 5-1. I mean, 5-1 at Portman Road, unheard of. And I'll never forget, I was detailed to speak to the players after the game that night, and I think the Norwich fans were kept in. It was a night game. It was a Thursday game by memory, wasn't it? I think Thursday night, and Norwich fans were still probably wisely kept in the stadium afterwards. And I don't think I've ever experienced it before or since, but the electricity, it felt tangible. That it was an actual electricity sense. I was pitch side in fairly close proximity. The energy that was coming off that away end was one of my abiding memories of doing this job, if I'm honest. And that's what this fixture is. Whether you have the emotional investment of being a fan, if there's a family tie going back many generations, that all weaves into it as well in terms of what it means to you and your family. Or you just happen to be dropped into the maelstrom of it as an outsider, essentially, who's not brought up and lived in this part of the world in their formative years. It is a special fixture, and it's a great fixture. And we're moving it on now to the current group. Both David Wagner after the game last night, Ashley Barnes as well. They can't wait. You get that sense of excitement and anticipation. And of course, they had to be professional. And pre-Sheffield Wednesday, it was all about Sheffield Wednesday, and that was the messaging externally. But that, very swiftly moved on now to countdown to Derby time, as David Wagner said. And the fact that, probably, and it's not meant to be disrespectful, but probably for the first time in this 13, 14-year time frame, they will be the underdogs. They aren't the side expected to win this fixture. There isn't a noticeable gap in terms of Norwich's superiority. If you want to be uncharitable, you'd say that maybe the superiority gap is in the other direction now. That is all very different from a Norwich perspective, and that's what adds to it. That they're not just going to play Ipswich and it's a derby. They're going to play an Ipswich team and a club and a manager under McKenna who look like they're really building something very special from our external vantage. And it'll be great now to be dropped into a game where, for probably the first time I can remember, Norwich are going there as, not the favourites in the fixture. And what will that do to the dynamic, and whether that will play to Norwich's advantage, whether Ipswich become a little bit inhibited about it and almost get caught up and swept away in the occasion. I don't expect that to be the case. I think McKenna's far too astute to allow that to happen, but it's going to be such a febrile atmosphere from the blue side of it. that it'd be very hard if you're an Ipswich player to detach yourself from the emotion of this occasion. And and we'll get into the nuance of how this game could play out. But I just think it's a game unlike any other. If whether you're from this part of the world or you've lived in this part of the world or worked in this part of the world for as long as I have, this is what you want. You don't want, with the greatest respect, as we've had too often in this period at Carpe Road, last night excepted, to go to Carpe Road, Preston, most recent example, and it's just it's almost a trial that you have to endure. Soporific football, lacking in any energy, intensity, apathetic feeling around the stands, all of that. Wash that away because we're going to the other end of the spectrum this Saturday, and I can't wait. And I'm not anything to do with it. So can you imagine what David Wagner, those players, and more importantly, those Norwich fans feel at the moment? They must be now, given things have turned slightly in a more positive direction, go and embrace it. Go and wring every last drop of emotion out of the occasion, and then hopefully, we're still talking about that unbeaten run in the derby come 2:30, 3 o'clock on Saturday afternoon.
Yeah, I'm labelling it Operation JDL, which is Operation Just Don't Lose, in the sense that if you play cricket and you've got the Ashes and you have hold of the Ashes and you draw, you retain the Ashes, as Australia did this summer. So in a similar way, it's like that with Norwich. But obviously, if you can go there and win, it's incredible. Just going off a slight tangent, Pad. Who are Cov's rivals then? What was the derby that you were kind of brought up on? Because there's loads of teams in the Midlands, so you kind of lose track.
Yeah, you do, Connor. Yeah. You've been an aficionado of Midlands football as well. You always talk so glowingly about Coventry, don't you? But to be honest, I was thinking about this on the walk into the office today. Coventry are in a bit of a Middlesbrough situation in the sense that in that part of the world, it's
they're too small for any of the major ones to really be bothered about.
I think there's interference on the line here, Connor. That didn't come through, but no, in the sense that it's Newcastle and Sunderland, and that's the rivalry. And Middlesbrough are this kind of guest in the corner at the Christmas party. They're not really part of any of the two main groups. And for Cov, it's a little bit like that. It's Aston Villa and Birmingham. That's the main rivalry down the years. But when I was going up, no, shut up, will you now? when I was in Coventry, when I was in my supporting phase, they were a Premier League team for quite a number of years, and so then it was Villa. It was Aston Villa basically because they were both Premier League. Birmingham were a step down. So. Yeah, but Coventry had a horrendous rate. I mean, it was like decades and decades. You mentioned him there. I think Darren Huckabee was part of the first team to win at Villa Park. So that was an historic occasion. And yeah, that was a great game to be part of. But my sort of fan experience of a derby was very much where Ipswich fans have probably been for the last 15 years, which was, I can't wait for the derby. Oh, no, not again. We've got beat kind of vibe. A bit like that Radio Suffolk commentator that time. Oh, no, that famous clip. Yeah. So I never really enjoyed the derby experience until they won 1 or 2 against Aston Villa. But no, nothing of the kind of intensity of an Ipswich Norwich where it's one or the other. There's no Peterborough or Cambridge or Northampton, dare I say, even wider. It's one or the other. It's blue or it's yellow and green. So quite jealous that you people and any Norwich fan listening or watching has basically been immersed in that as they've grown up, because you don't really get that in the Coventry sphere, unless you're playing Walsall, obviously, Connor.
Well, as they were in League Two a few years ago, which shows what a great job Mark Robbins has done more than anything else. Sorry, Sam, it is interesting. One thing I do want to speak about is this idea. I've heard a few people say it, and maybe it's kind of clutching at straws or trying to be optimistic, and I understand that. But this, form goes out of the window in derbies. Well, I get that as a concept, but then you look at the last 14 years and it hasn't done really at any point. Norwich have kind of always largely got it. There have been a couple of times where the clubs have been in similar positions, but largely Norwich have always maybe been the favourites. They've been stronger favourites than in other games, but a lot of the time they've gone into the games as favourites, and they've kind of not always won, but always come out maybe either winning or obviously not losing, retaining as we maybe say the bragging rights. So how much are you kind of placing in that in that kind of view that, you know, it's not about form, or it's not about form, even though Norwich are entering this game with what is now a 6-game run that has shown real signs of improvement in terms of output and points and results and scores, etc.
Yeah, I think both things are true, probably to a certain extent. I would say in a derby, given the number of elements involved that aren't normally involved, it is probably less about form than a normal game, but you can't just completely dismiss it. As you said, Norwich in recent years have underlined that. Really, you go back to that last derby and it was pretty much exactly how you would have expected any sort of promotion chasers to play against any of the sort of relegation battling teams, which is what Ipswich were at the time. Just a fairly simple 3-0 win. And although there was all the emotion and Paul Lambert was there and, you know, there was all the winking and the sending off, aside from all that drama, what happened on the pitch was pretty much exactly what you'd expect outside of a sort of derby situation. So I don't think you can completely write off form or the quality of teams or anything like that going into a derby. But I do understand the feeling a little bit, because it does somehow feel like a sort of cup final where it's this 50-50 clash, and mentality will play more of a role than it will normally. You know, there will be Ipswich players, as much as there will be, you know, McKenna will be keen, as Paddy said, to keep the lid on it a little bit. Players are individual, and there will be some who will have this in their head and will be feeling the pressure of it and will be building it up themselves. Just peering over sort of that side of things and how they're looking into this game, there does feel a level of anticipation that they probably don't need, given how well they're going. They're 1 point off the top of the table. They're 10 points clear of third at the moment, and they didn't really need to create a cup final for themselves, to be honest, going into this one. But they have done that, and it's about now whether they can really cope with the pressure. I would suggest they probably can, given, you know, some of the games they've gone into this season and done very well. The number of times they've come from behind to win games or take points from games shows the quality of the mentality in that dressing room. So I'm not sure that'll affect them too much, but I think it is definitely something that can affect derbies. Equally, we're probably hearing more of those cliches from Norwich fans and on this side of the divide, because those are the things that give them hope, right? Those are the things that can make the difference between where Norwich are and where Ipswich are. The way to bridge that gap is probably by suggesting that form goes out of the window and all these cliches. And it is true that if Norwich wants to get a result out of this, the best way to do that is probably to whip up more of a derby atmosphere. It's a team that can probably cope with that a little bit more, as much as I and we have criticised the cliches of experience and intangibles, and the fact that they've gone for sort of bigger, stronger profiles of player rather than maybe focusing on technical ability and tactical ability at times. You look at the likes of, you know, Shane Duffy, who didn't have a great game against Sheffield Wednesday, but the likes of him and Kenny McLean, Ashley Barnes, they aren't players that are going to shy away from a fight. So if Norwich can turn it into all of those cliches and the derby day that a lot of people expect and the way that a lot of people talk about them, that probably does go in their favour against a team that, by all accounts, and by looking at the league table, is better than them in most departments, really. So that might be the way for Wagner to do it. I don't think there have been too many signs that they've been able to play especially well against the best teams so far this season. You look at Leicester, and although they've played fairly decent at the time, there was a lot of compliments actually given to that performance. They still got picked off and beaten 2-0 fairly comfortably. So they are a way off the quality of those teams that are competing for promotion at the moment, and probably why we're hearing so many of these cliches where we might not have been in recent years is because this time around that's probably what's on Norwich's side.
Yeah, and it is interesting because, and again, you can't really do this with derbies, but you kind of take the emotion out of it, and you look at Ipswich Town, and it's and even in contrast to Norwich City, in that no team has scored more goals at home than Ipswich Town have this season. Only Rotherham have conceded more goals on the road than Norwich City. Those kind of statistics feel quite problematic heading into this game, but also just how good, and I don't think it should be lost on anyone, just how good Ipswich Town have been so far. 21 games, only one side has ever made a better start to a championship season than that, and that's Leicester City, who are above them at this moment in time. 10 points from third, as Sam said, Paddy. I mean, what Kieran McKenna has done there, what that group of players has done, they've got a better points per game average at the moment than Norwich City's title winners in 18-19 and in 2021. It's remarkable what they've achieved in this opening 21 games that they have, particularly at home. I think it's 10 games at home, 9 wins. That defeat, of course, coming to Daniel Farke's Leeds. It's been a really tough place to go, Portman Road, this year, and they've been quite formidable there.
Absolutely, yeah. I will put a caveat in. I think there's a lot of dross in this championship. So, these historical records that Leicester and Ipswich are setting points per game, the fact that sort of Preston were I think 8th and after they were midweek, and that Preston's team that turned up at Carpe Road, I know they were in a bit of a trough in terms of results, and maybe that tipped more towards defensively. I think they were missing 1 or 2 of their strikers, but if that team's 8th in the division, what does that say? And what does it say about Norwich, sadly, until this recent upturn? So, yeah, but what I would say, though, and you referenced I think it's 30 goals in 10 home games, is only, that's 6 goals more than any other team in the division at home. So straight away, prolific in terms of goal scoring threat, and we've seen these goals of the season contenders. They've been banging in almost seemingly every home game, but look at the goals they've conceded at home.
This is what I was going to raise. Yeah, this is exactly 17. What I was going to raise. 17. Only Huddersfield and Blackburn have conceded more goals at home, but when you're scoring 30, it's
yeah. But if you're breaking it down, then effectively they're conceding 1.7 goals every home game. Mm-hmm. Yes, they might be outscoring teams, but Norwich will, if that is a window into, and it clearly is, over this body of games, how they go about the task and what the style of football McKenna wants, and that they want to be progressive and on the front foot, and how exciting and exhilarating that must be for an Ipswich fan to go and watch. But they can see lots of opportunities and they can see lots of goals, and Norwich will get opportunities. And we saw last night, certainly with 1 or 2 instances, they have players who can score goals. And I just think in terms of the context of how this game could unfold, if Norwich do, score, then how impressive they've been this season, that does rock them back, and that does, maybe shift the dynamic, because, ultimately it'll be about moments, and it'll be periods in games, and making the most of maybe when you're on top in games, and if Norwich get their noses in front, hypothetically, then that's a different type of game, maybe to the one many people fear / expect. But of course, the flip side of that is, if you look at the fact that they've scored 30 goals, that's 3 a game. So if Norwich, my fear is that maybe Norwich decide that they need to go a bit more pragmatic and defensive, and is that Hernandez in? Is that Fashnak in? And almost kind of frustrate. I just do not see that policy paying off, because Ipswich will score goals against any opponent, as they have done this season. Even in that Leeds game, they lost. How many did they score? Was it 4-3 that day?
4-3, yeah.
3-4. So, an idea that Norwich could go with any derivative that is parking a bus is going to be doomed to failure. So I hope personally that he continues on in the same vein last night. If that's Rowe, if that's Science, maybe a nod to maybe one of those, taking one of those out, but still being willing to go and engage and duel with this team, because they will get opportunities to score, and it's only, I think, by going that method that they're going to get anything out of this game. If they go with a passive approach, for example, Sunderland, how they set up that day, they got beat 3-1, and it could have been a lot heavier. But it was almost the initiative was conceded before a ball was kicked in terms of the setup he went with that day, the personnel. I don't want to see anything of that nature from Wagner and his coaching staff going into this game. And that isn't a charter to go gung-ho and try and beat Ipswich 5-4, because the reality is they probably have better attacking players at this current moment in time. But at least get the balance right and tip it more towards, let's probe for the vulnerability that's clearly there in those stats in terms of goals that they concede. But it's a fascinating game in prospect in terms of just the nuances of how both respective coaches look at the opponents, look for the weak points, and then try to exploit them.
Yeah, and this feels maybe like an apt point to bring in that chat that I had with Mark Heath, head of football at the East Anglian Daily Times, about Ipswich Town, about the derby, about the optimism that they feel over in Suffolk heading into this game. Here's a little bit of a chat with him, and then we'll pick it up on the other side, speaking about how Norwich approach this game, how they get something out of this game, and whether they can get something out of this game. Okay, everybody. I'm not looking forward to this particularly, but it feels like we have to get some balance from the Suffolk end. And you can already see a beaming smile if you're watching this podcast as opposed to listening to it. And we've already maybe given some of our thoughts and fears and feelings heading to Portman Road on Saturday. And Mark Heath is going to join us, head of football at the East Anglian Daily Times, of course, and podcast host of the Kings of Anglia. Try not to laugh at that name. I've managed it, so you can avoid it as well. Mark, this might be the last time I get to say it. So 14 years, 12 games. I think it'll be about 28 days on Saturday. It's been quite a period for Ipswich and Norwich in this East Anglian Derby. Feels like we're about to enter a period where that's about to flip for the first time. I guess the first question, and I'll just sort of sit back as I answer it, is the mood heading into this East Anglian Derby must be incredibly positive and almost the most positive it's been for a substantial period of time.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, first of all, Connor. It's definitely positive. I mean, how can you not be positive when they're sitting top of the table? They've made a record start to the season, them and Leicester. They've only lost 2 games all season. They've only lost 5 games in the calendar year. They're scoring goals for fun, playing some unbelievable football, and they've got one of the best young managers in the country. So it's hard not to be positive going into the game. And as you say, like, obviously it's been a period of domination in the derby for Norwich. Nothing short of that for 14 years, as you say. And there's going to be some young town fans at the game on Saturday who will never have seen Ipswich Town win a derby. It goes that far back. It seems unbelievable. But definitely heading into this game, I think you would say that it feels like in the past when we talk about these games, it's always been kind of hope more than expectation from the town side of things, even going back to the playoff season. That was more kind of, well, we might, but I think now there's an expectation going into this game that this clearly, you look at the form, the teams, the table, all that kind of stuff, you would say that Town have to be favourites, and favourites to win in some style. But it's the derby, so you never know.
Yeah, I know everyone says that form goes out of the window, but as I was saying to you off camera, I think in the last 14 years it really hasn't. But there have been a couple of opportunities for Ipswich within that run. There was obviously the Luke Chambers header at Carpe Road that Tim Closer then cancelled out. There was the one Paul Hurst at the start of that campaign where Ipswich probably should have won that game and didn't. And actually it kind of in the end sort of seemed to save Daniel Farker, and Norwich went on quite the run, and Ipswich obviously went in the opposite direction. So there have been moments within that run, but like you say, I think I was trying to think back. I was 9, I think, when Ipswich last beat Norwich. So I've never seen Ipswich beat Norwich in the flesh. I've got a vague recollection of listening to it on a car radio and listening to the end of the game, and not really having a real understanding of the magnitude of it. Feel like I might experience that this weekend. But let's talk about what Ipswich Town have done this season, because it's remarkable, really. If you take obviously the rivalry and the emotion out of it, what Kieran McKenna has achieved. I think I heard last night that it's 100 points in this calendar year. It's staggering what he's been able to do and how he's been able to, I guess, galvanise not just the team on the pitch, but seemingly the whole club.
Yeah, I mean, it is obviously McKenna's a huge part of that, clearly, as the manager, and I'll talk about him in a little bit. But the whole club itself has been kind of completely turned on its head, really, since the American owners came in. Since Marcus Evans left, the American owners came in. They brought Mark Ashton in as CEO, a man who's experienced at this level, and he keeps referring to it as, well, he started off as referring to it as a plane taking off, and now he's referring to it as a rocket ship, which kind of gives you the feel of the, I guess, the mood around the club. Everything they're doing at the moment seems to work, and you've got obviously performances on the pitch, the way they play football, the atmosphere they create around games at Portman Road, the attendances are unbelievable. I mean, 28,000 plus per game average, which just a couple of seasons ago would have been nonsense if you'd have said they will get that. I mean, it would have been pie in the sky. So the whole feeling around Ipswich Town is going like that. Like, there is genuinely a feeling that this club is now destined for really, really big things once again. And it's been a lot, pretty much my entire period of being head of football / sports editor at the Anglian. That's not been the case. It's been before. It was just a slow, steady decline, and death by 1,000 cuts, and sleepwalking into trouble, and all that kind of stuff. And then suddenly, things have changed. And promotion last season, obviously, the way they got it was fantastic. That 19-game unbeaten run to end the season. But I don't think. Well, I know even the most crazily optimistic, wildly unrealistic Ipswich Town fan would not have dared to dream that they would be top of the table. What are we? Wednesday, December the 13th, 10 points clear of third place. Crazy, absolutely crazy. So yeah, things are good, mate.
Yes, they definitely are, and I think to give people kind of a bit of scale, because I think from this end, it's certainly throughout those early periods, it was it's just momentum. And this has maybe been the external view in the Championship. It's been interesting, kind of listening to kind of debates, and it's always been, well, Ipswich will fall away, and Ipswich, I think they've proven that they're not going to do that. And you referenced the points gap, but I think it's most points of a promoted side ever at this stage in the campaign. Might even be the most of any side ever at this campaign with Leicester as well. I mean, it is just staggering. More obviously higher points per game at the moment than Norwich City's title winning side in 18-19. I mean, your boys are in pretty good nick at the moment.
Yeah, I think it's the second best 20-game start there's ever been in the Championship.
Yeah,
second only to Leicester.
Yeah,
and every single other one of those like top 15 teams have been promoted, either as champions or just going up. So the signs are very, very good, but clearly there's still a long way to go. And as Kieran McKenna will tell you, he doesn't even look at the table, Connor. That's what he tells us. Doesn't look at the table. He just thinks about the process and the next game and the next game and making plans. And when Kieran McKenna speaks, you kind of believe him, because he's such a thoughtful, methodical, analytical, calm man. And he communicates in such a way that it's hard not to kind of be swept up by what he's saying. There's a logic behind everything and a plan behind everything. And that, along with many other things, has been what he's brought to Ipswich Town. He's created this culture around the team where even if you're on the fringes of the team, you know what your role is. You know that at some point there's an important part for you to play. There's none of these kind of fringe players who are really big timing it and sulking because they're not playing. They all feel bought in. And obviously the way he's got them playing and the way they play instinctively now is all come from him, and the way he's improved every single member of the squad, which again is not something we've seen under previous Town managers for a long time. Players kind of in some cases went downhill under managers, or got bumped out the team, or went and sat on a naughty step, or that kind of thing. The whole culture under McKenna has completely changed, completely revolutionised, and that's again, it's very exciting.
A few more from me, but it's always interesting, I think, to get perceptions of the other side. I appreciate it's more layered in emotion and rivalry and all of those aspects, but once you maybe get past the humour of the situation that I'm sure there is in Suffolk, I mean, what do you make of what's happened at Norwich City really since that relegation from the Premier League? Because probably like Norwich City fans, there was an expectation, and again, probably Championship wide, that it would be an immediate bounce back, this kind of yo-yoing that they've maybe fallen into. It hasn't been that. You guys have obviously been through a long process of kind of being in the Championship and maybe having the club chipped away at for a period of time. Do you see similarities in what has happened at Norwich City over the last 18 months or so to what happened at Ipswich Town over, admittedly, a much longer period? But are you seeing kind of similar trends and narratives?
100%, yeah. I mean, first of all, you say humour. There is no humour from the Ipswich Town point of view. We can't do yet. The game hasn't happened. Ipswich Town still haven't beaten Norwich City for 14 years. So until the whistle is blown on Saturday and Ipswich Town win the game, there can't be any humour. Pride before a fall and that kind of thing. I mean, in terms of from the outside looking in, as someone who covers Ipswich Town on a daily basis, there seem to be a lot of similarities. Certainly in the language that I've seen you and the boys using around the club. I think it was you referred to sleepwalking, the kind of signings as well, maybe a bit more pragmatic than exciting. Delia, obviously, the other day having a go at the fans. That's never a good look, and that's very similar to Marcus Evans when he actually trolled his own fans by using the phrase "be careful what you wish for" in a statement that he put out. So yeah, I mean, I am by no means clearly an expert in what's going on in Norwich. Merely just an observer, very interested observer from the outside. But there do seem to be a lot of similarities, and I guess it must be a worrying time for you at the moment in terms of the direction of travel of the club.
Yes, absolutely. And we could go off on a tangent and be here for another hour talking about that. So I'll spare you that. But I mean, it's a really interesting contest this weekend because you've got Ipswich Town, who I think have scored the most goals at home of anybody. Norwich City, who have scored the second most goals on the road behind Rotherham, which is a scary prospect. Only one defeat at home this season to Leeds United. I mean, the question I guess I wanted to ask is, how on earth do Norwich City go about beating Ipswich Town at Portman Road? What if you were David Wagner? What would be the blueprint that you were setting up your team? Would it be park the bus and hope for the best? Would it be come and have a go at us? How would you kind of set up? Is there a way to set up? Give us some hope,
of course.
Mark.
Yeah, I mean, what I will say is Town do concede goals. We've seen that. I mean, until recently, they had a 6-game run where they conceded a goal inside the first 15 minutes. We saw last night, Town play out from the back. They're absolutely committed to that approach. And last night, Hladky passed the ball straight to a Watford player and they're 1-0 down. So I think Norwich will get opportunities in terms of how you set up to play against Ipswich Town. The sides that we've seen given Town the most difficulty this season have been sides that have come out and really got in their face. We saw the first half at Birmingham when they went 2-0 down. I think they were shocked by how intense Birmingham were when they came out under Rooney, and it took kind of Birmingham really running out of puff for Town to get back into the game. Similar sort of thing we saw at Huddersfield. The Leeds United game, obviously they lost 4-3 at home. That was maybe slightly different in that Leeds just had some really, really good players. That was the point where they possibly peaked, and they had all their star players back for about one game, I think, before some of them vanished off to destinations different. But Leeds could just go toe to toe with Town that day. So I probably wouldn't suggest parking the bus. And we've seen also it's a different Ipswich Town when they're playing at Portman Road. The games tend to be high scoring. We've seen that 4-3 defeat to these. We've seen a 4-3 win over Blackburn. There's been 3-2s. There's been 4-2s. So they do tend to be really high scoring, entertaining games at Portman Road. And Town will no doubt come out and absolutely go for it. So I do think there will be opportunities for Norwich in this game. Leif Davis, the left back, for example, plays incredibly high up the pitch, which means there's always some space, generally speaking, that can be exploited. And again, with Wes Burns, the right winger, they play really high up. So there are always gaps. And Town do invariably. And you wouldn't look at them and go, well, their defence is shaky. But they do have a kind of tendency to concede goals. I wouldn't go into the game thinking there's just no hope. I wouldn't be at all surprised if Norwich scored 1, 2, 3 goals. Who knows? But we shall see. I hope they don't come and park the bus. Put it like that.
I fear they might, but yeah, I fear they might, and we might see more of those fours than we do threes on the other side. How do you see this game going, Mark? Because from an Ipswich Town perspective, I mean, for me, it would just be this has to be the time, doesn't it? With the way the clubs are going, with how the form has been, everything. Take non-emotion out of it, the league table, the respective performances of the side, the respective states of the club, everything points towards an Ipswich Town victory. I can imagine there's probably been a lot of people internally, supporters as well, who have been kind of waiting for this game and this moment for a long period of time, maybe since the change of ownership and kind of everything that they've been building up. I know they've had a few people off Norwich in various areas staff-wise inside the club. So I think there has always been that desire to better. Feels maybe like we're at a point of the two clubs going in opposite directions. How do you see this game going? Because an Ipswich Town win would be a pretty defining moment, wouldn't it, for kind of this new era, for all that they've built. Feels like that's maybe the one thing at the moment beyond the Premier League promotion that is lacking, a victory against Norwich.
Yeah, I mean, it would be massive for the club, wouldn't it? When you talk about 14 years since beating your biggest rival, that is clearly, in terms of emotion and everything around that, a win over Norwich, coupled with everything else that's going on at the football club, would be huge. But as I previously said, I don't think there's any kind of humour or kind of cockiness, certainly not from the players going into the game. And Kieran McKenna always, and I know most managers do this, but I believe it when he says it, always talks about treating the opponent with respect and having a kind of bespoke game plan for each opponent. He and his team would have watched Norwich. They'll have come up with a particular special game plan for this game. They'll have known who was going to play in this game, I'm sure, for weeks, and why. There's always a logic behind that. So in terms of how it's going to go, I mean, forgive me, but I would have to predict an Ipswich Town win. I mean, I don't think you could look at the two sides and not predict that. But in terms of how that happens, I think there are two ways it could go. I think if Ipswich Town score early, and given the whole atmosphere around the game, we've got the Blue Action fan group meeting the coach outside Portman Road, which they did just before the Exeter game last season, which is the game where they could have got promoted. They went on to win 6-0. There was such an incredible kind of tide of momentum around the team that day. I think there's going to be a similar feeling going to Saturday. So if Town can score early, then I don't think it's going to be. It might not be pretty. It may be a big score, but equally, as I've said, Town can concede goals early, and if Norwich can come to Portman Road, get an early goal, and then you start to think, well, they haven't beaten them for 14 years, and then there maybe starts to be a little bit of pressure on the home players. I don't think they'll feel it. They're not the sort of the team that we saw in the past whenever Town kind of came up against any kind of difficulty, they tended to crumble, they tended to fall apart, and we've seen numerous times this season when they've come from behind to win games. And McKenna's always banging on about resilience, which is a big thing he's built into them. We saw it again last night in the win at Watford. So the kind of short answer to your question is I think Town will win, but I'm torn as to how it plays out. I can see. I wouldn't be at all surprised if we're sitting here and it's 4-1, something like that to Town. But equally, with it being a derby, Norwich can maybe stifle them, get an early goal. It could be one of those nervy 2-1 sort of games. I don't want to appear like it's like a foregone conclusion, because clearly it's not. And we are in Ipswich Town are in no position to give it the big one before the game, because the game's not been played yet.
But save that for Monday morning.
Yeah, it's all fun and games then, isn't it? When the game's played and the game has been decided. But I would have to predict, and I'm sure most right-thinking people looking at the form and everything else would have to predict an Ipswich Town win.
Yeah, Mark, thank you very much for your time. We obviously wish you, I guess, as much as good luck as we can ahead of Saturday's game. Goodness me, I don't think I'm looking forward to it. Welcome back, everybody. PinkUn.com Norwich City podcast, sponsored by Coleman's of Norwich. Looking ahead to the East Anglian Derby, that was the chat with Mark Heath. As you can see, they are suitably chipper over that side of the East Anglian divide at this moment in time. They're going to do like a coach greet thing, which I think, as Mark said there, the last time they did that, they beat Exeter 6-0 and secured promotion. Slightly different occasions, admittedly, but that's interesting that they feel there's a necessity for that, and I think it's something actually that Wes Burns has requested. So this is very interesting, and all of it is very interesting. We've spoken maybe about where the teams are in terms of the league table, in terms of Ipswich in particular, and the start to the season that they have had. Norwich do come into this game, as we said, with a little bit of form after a difficult spell, players returning from injury, although it doesn't necessarily feel like any of those will be available for Saturday's game at Portman Road. Let's come to you then Sam, because I mean Paddy was speaking about it a little bit in terms of how Norwich City go and approach this game. I agree with him. I think to go to Portman Road and just kind of cling on for dear life and try and get something and try and frustrate, just don't see that working. And as Marcus said there, I think teams who have done that at Portman Road have been picked off quite drastically when they've adopted that approach. There's clearly a balance to be struck here. It's about how David Wagner finds it. How do you feel is the best way, I guess, in terms of personnel, in terms of setup, for Norwich City to go to Portman Road and pick up a result?
I think it's probably to try and emulate the way that they found success early on in the season. While I don't think just parking the bus and going with the likes of Hernandez and Fastnat to try and limit the effectiveness of Ipswich even in sort of advanced areas, I don't think that's the best policy. I also don't feel that the likes of Shane Duffy have the pace and athleticism and sort of flexibility to be able to cope with how quickly Ipswich move the ball. That's something I've been shocked by really every time I've watched them this season, is the amount of space they create in opposition halves. So they move the ball really well in their own half, invite a press, and then what that creates is enough time and space for, if they wanted it, all of their attacking players to probably take about 3 seconds on the ball every time they get into the opposition half. It feels like a counter-attack every time they do that. So I think if Norwich do go all out pressing and try and take the game to Ipswich fully, they might leave themselves exposed to that a little bit. But equally, they need some attacking quality on the pitch to try and take advantage of the gaps that Ipswich will leave. And reintroducing the likes of Fastnat and Hernandez purely for their sort of tactical defensive superiority wouldn't be the best move for me. I know Wagner spoke in his pre-Sheffield Wednesday press conference about how he feels goals and assists around the corner for Hernandez. I'm not sure where he's getting that prediction from, to be honest, but just based on the contributions of Rowe and especially Sainz against Sheffield Wednesday, I don't really see how you can drop a player like that who's just hit that form. Obviously, his first start, and I think it absolutely underlined and typified everything with his time since signing for the club, that after 7 minutes he produces a top quality turn and smashes it into the top corner. He's not a player that's really very involved in terms of like a Buendia that wants the ball all the time and will drop deep to try and affect things from there. But every time he gets it in the final third, he comes alive and he has that quality and that composure that I think a lot of people lack in that Norwich squad. You look at the other players sort of in that department of attackers, even Ida and Barnes. You saw the 2 chances that Barnes missed before he eventually got his goal. There's not really that composure and that ability to produce quality consistently when they're in that final third, and that's certainly not the case with Ono Hernandez. So although I wouldn't be especially surprised, to be honest, given we know Wagner's principles and the way that he's gone with team selection so far, I think it would absolutely be the wrong decision to go back to that experience, especially in forward areas. And although defensively I'd probably argue you want a little bit more athleticism to be able to deal with Ipswich and the way that they move the ball in the opposition half, I think that's a moot point, really. I think we all know that Shane Duffy is 96% likely to start at Portman Road, and there's not really, there's not much value in discussing what they could do without him, because he's a player that Wagner trusts clearly so much. Whenever he's available, whenever he's fit, he's in the team, whether it's midweek and they've got games at the weekend, or he's just been suspended and he's coming back, or Jayden Warner's been in his place and played fairly well. He is somebody who is going to be in the team, you feel. So they need to find a way to counteract his weaknesses that I think may be pretty well exposed by Ipswich. and find a way to deal with that. Although probably having Kenny McLean alongside him will help them on that front. Tactically, I just think they might be exposed a little bit against a top quality team, because although they did play fairly well against Sheffield Wednesday, they're not really a top side in any way. And this Norwich setup does look quite jumbled at the moment. You have a really experienced sort of base to it, and two centre backs, especially when McLean's not in there, who don't have a lot of pace, who aren't really especially capable with the ball. And then, you know, up front you have players who really need service and aren't going to come deep to get it. So I think that being disjointed in that sense might be where they come apart against Ipswich, and maybe having the likes of Marcelino Nunez in there will help provide that link. But equally, you know, you come to midfield, and that's another worry in terms of the defensive contribution that an axis of Nunez and Sarah can really produce. So there are probably a few decisions that Wagner has to make. I don't think he can put the best solution on the pitch to deal with Ipswich, no matter what he tries. But yeah, there's probably quite a lot of decisions to make. And if I could firm up one thing and tell him to do one thing going into this game, it would be to keep the likes of Sainz and Rowe in the team and not just go back to his old, familiar, comforting Fastnacht and Hernandez.
I'm going to ask you a couple of quick fire questions now around the team. So just yes or no will be fine. I'll start with you, Paddy. Kenny McLean, a centre back at Portman Road, yes or no?
Yes.
Sam?
Sorry, is this what I want to do or what will happen?
Either or, up to you.
Yes, probably to both actually for McLean. Yeah.
Borja Sainz from the start. This is probably a will he question. Will he do this? Borja Sainz from the start, Paddy?
Yes.
Sam?
Yes.
And last one, so we'll need a name for this, right? Is there a surprise inclusion? If so, who, Paddy, in coming into that Derby 11?
Trying to think who he went with on Wednesday night and who might dip out. Well, I don't expect it, but if you were putting me on, come up with a surprise, then Poeta instead of Yanulis.
Oof. Sam?
Why not Sargent? If he's going to be in training after the game, why not throw him in there?
That's an interesting one. I think there's a really interesting battle on, and this is particularly pertinent given what unfolded on Wednesday against Sheffield Wednesday, on Norwich City's right side, because Leif Davis is one of the best creators in the division. Very comparable numbers to Gabriel Sarah. Might even have one more assist, I think, than Sarah at this moment in time. And this, maybe there's a risk and reward element to this. Does David Wagner go and trust Jack Stacey to go and put up with Leif Davis for the whole 90 minutes? Does he, I don't know, play Callum Fisher again? I think that's probably unlikely. And then the reward element of that is because they're so aggressive with their positioning. Davis plays so high up. Burns on the other side plays so high up. Obviously, Brandon Williams in support or a right back in support. They're so aggressive in wide areas with how they position players. How Norwich City, I guess, can exploit space going the other way, and that feels like pace in transition. And actually, when you think about maybe some of the successes that they've had this season, particularly on the road, a lot of them, Adam Eder, perhaps pertinently of late, have come against high lines and with space to run into. So there are going to be opportunities if Norwich City can get that transitional element right. But I think it's a really curious one about how he manages Leif Davis and Ipswich's left side, and whether he feels Jack Stacey has the defensive capabilities to stand up to that particular test. So I think that's a battleground that's worth keeping an eye out as well. Let's start with you then, Paddy, as we come to the close of this podcast. Portman Road, Saturday, 12:30, 14 years of history on the line for Norwich City. Bragging rights, very, very important 3 points as well on the line, by the way, with their proximity to the top six at this moment in time. How do you see it unfolding? And then once you've talked us through the game, let's finish with that score prediction.
Well, I mean, even though we're going in now with a little bit higher levels of optimism and confidence from 4 wins and a draw from 6, and you look at the form guide across the whole championship in the last 6 games, there's only one team who got more points. Sadly, that team is the team they play on Saturday. That's Ipswich. So, but they shouldn't lack for a little bit of renewed belief, because there's a body of work now in terms of results. Yes, we can all dissect the performances and some parts of the performances, but it feels like it's tracking now a little bit like you've seen with Wagner throughout his entirety of his career, wherever he's been, these streaky streaks, these clumps of, we saw at the start of this season, where they can accumulate points and games back to back in close proximity. Now, what we all hope is that Ipswich is a continuation, another link in the chain, rather than tipping the other side, and we're going to then embark on another poor run. Every piece of logic really dictates. I mean, what are they now? I think it's 21 point difference between the two teams, which at this stage of the season is it underlines graphically where the various respective trajectories of both of these squads are. Ipswich will now, I think, pretty much expect to be in the top six. They're not going to message that, but it takes a hell of a fall from grace in the second part of the season. So I think they're nailed on, and now the debate is: do they maintain this? Do they hold off a Leeds? Do they hold off a Southampton, maybe a West Brom, and get that automatic spot? And they're in the Premier League next season. I wouldn't put it past them, if I'm honest, because when they have been tested, they lost at West Brom recently, and they've bounced back. I think they won at home, and then they went to Borough. Although Borough were depleted in terms of injuries, but still, it's a difficult place to go. Albeit Hull won there again in midweek or so. So every part of the head would tell you that this is an Ipswich home win. But I don't know. Something I said after the game last night, I thought Norwich would get a point, and I'm going to stick with that. So madness maybe, because if you looked at the respective seasons to this point, you would say there's only one outcome. But if there was only one outcome, and if it was that predictable, we wouldn't love this game, would we? Because that's the beauty of this game, that things happen and you just go, how on earth has that unfolded? So I'm going to go with more of a feeling rather than what your head would tell you, and go 2-2.
Operation JDL. I said it. All aboard. Sam Seaman, how do you see this game unfolding? And let's have your prediction as well.
I also got this weird optimism.
Here we go. Yes.
I was actually speaking to Will Jennings, one of our columnists, this morning, and he's feeling the same way. And I'm just getting this. I feel like it's the way to go. If you're going into a derby, it's better that than go into it being miserable. And they've come off the back of some decent results throughout my lifetime, and throughout the time I've been paying attention to Norwich City. They just have not lost to Ipswich Town. That just hasn't happened. So I'm going to be optimistic and say that they have definitely the capabilities to go and get a point. It might take a bit of a fair wind, maybe not a top quality performance from Ipswich, but all the pressure is on them. All the pressure's on the home side at Portman Road. So yeah, after let's say I think Science might produce a moment of quality, and they draw 1-1, which probably the form goal scoring wise on both sides doesn't suggest it will, but I think the lower scoring it is, probably the higher chance Norwich have of getting something out of it. And I was sort of between 1-1 and 2-2, and Paddy took 2-2. So yeah, I'll say 1-1 and be optimistic. What about you, Connor?
I cannot believe it. I cannot believe it. This is incredible levels of. We always get told we're too negative. Look at this. You two are almost giddy on East Anglian Derby juices. It's incredible. Sadly, I'm not going to follow suit. I don't think. I'm going to be a bit more cold, I think, and maybe try and take a little bit of the emotion out of it, which again could be an error. But I think Ipswich are calculated. I think they're going to manage this game. For me, I can kind of see two scenarios. I can see, so I think the scenarios that you've both painted, I think that is very possible, actually, very possible, because I think if Norwich can go there and look there, for all that we've said about not parking the bus, there's going to have to be an element of them frustrating and being frustrating to the hosts and keeping themselves in the game. And I think the first goal is crucial, and the timing of the first goal is crucial, because if Ipswich come out of the blocks and score an early goal, I would really, really fear for Norwich City at that point, because of the occasion, because of the confidence, because of the atmosphere at Portman Road. I think all of that would become immensely difficult. I think if Norwich can keep themselves in the game, ride out what I think will be a really initial burst from Ipswich, grow into it, maybe get a goal themselves, then again, the occasion becomes a lot more different, and suddenly the history does start to bleed into some of those supporters' minds and some of those players' minds as well. That being said, I think, and again, Portman Road, this season has been a horrendous place to go for opposing teams, despite the fact that they've been goals scored. I think Ipswich are everything that Norwich dislike in terms of opponent and how they will play, and the quality, the pace, the movement, what they do with the ball, how they manoeuvre it. I think McKenna's got them incredibly well coached, and I think they probably will edge it. And to be fair, at the start of the week, this would have been pre-Preston, I was feeling significantly more fearful about how this game could unfold. But I think it will be maybe a lot closer because of some of that emotion that you spoke about it. But I think the quality, as it has done, to be fair, for Norwich over the last 14 years, will probably just eke out on the Ipswich side. So sadly, and it really does pay me to say this, I think I'm going to go with a 2-1 home win in the East Anglian Derby, which would obviously mark the end of what is quite the era and quite the run. But I'm finding it really difficult. But I really want to be proven wrong. And actually, for all that we've spoken about it, and for all of the hype and emotion, actually, for Norwich City to be underdogs, and for this, it's not a free hit, because East Anglian derbies aren't a free hit, but Ipswich expect to beat Norwich. I think probably Ipswich fans expect to beat Norwich. There are a contingency, not all of them. There are a contingency of Norwich fans that will probably share my school of thought and will feel that Ipswich will beat Norwich. So in that sense, it's up to Norwich to go and prove everyone wrong. And sometimes that can be a really powerful thing. And I hope with every fibre of my being that every ounce of that comes to fruition on Saturday. So a very apologetic prediction from me, I think, to end the pod. Paddy, give us a rousing bit of positivity as we head to Portman Road. Give us your best Sean Dyche speech that will send us all down to Suffolk, ready to put on the war paint and go to battle.
Short and sweet. Carpe Diem. Seize the day.
There we go. Thank you very much for listening. See you all at Portman Road.